Well, first of all, I'm so glad to be with all of you today. I know some of you I've had a connection with over many, many years, and so it's really I'm thrilled to be in this space with you, truly. Um, I've always had an interest in the arts from the time I was a young child. In fact, before I can kind of remember, I was making art, and so it's one of those things that I have a hard time picking the moment in which I pivoted towards the arts because I've always done that. You know, I was the kid in elementary school who was always making the billboards for the teachers, and I was entering every poster contest. And if you put crayons or paints in front of me, they were going to get very well used. And I had a household that supported that and allowed sort of the mess of art making. I wasn't really a museum person until I was an adult. My grandfather actually, who lived in Ohio, in Toledo, he was really the one who introduced me to museums. I wasn't really introduced to them here. It wasn't something that my parents were really interested in. But the actual making of art and art being kind of part of everyday life is something that has always been with me.
Well, what is your biggest influences or inspirations in your work? What do you think really molds gives you that? I got to do it.
As an artist, I mean, I think, my greatest inspiration as an artist are obviously looking at other artists' works. And, where my interest lies has evolved over time. As a printmaker, which is my artistic medium, as an individual artist, I look at lots of printmakers, both across history as well as in the contemporary landscape. But really, my greatest influences in a lot of ways aren't even about always people making art. It's really about people kind of living fully. It's people who are strong storytellers. Educators are really strong influences for me, right? Like people who can take lots of information and distill it down in a way in which we can all connect to it. My influences aren't just about visual artists. I'm just as inspired watching farmers farm and gardeners garden and teachers teach and truth tellers doing truth telling work. And so I have kind of, I guess I would say, lots of inputs into what I do, as both an artist and somebody who holds space for other artists. I mean, there are some artists across time that still live very much with me and my work. Artists like Augusta Savage, who of course was from Northeast Florida, who was an artist, an educator, an activist, somebody who created spaces for other artists. Like those tend to be my greatest influences.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about style and your style. And
Okay.
you talked about printmaking. It evolves over time. So how has your style evolved over time? And what factors do you think have influenced this evolution of or has it? Are you the same? I'm always
Uh,
interested in how that happens.
yeah. So, I mean, as an artist, I mean, definitely my work has evolved in how long has it been? 25 years that I've been sort of seriously making art. And I haven't made art consistently across that 25 years. I've had times of great productivity and times where I was not productive and really active as an artist. The consistency is that being a printmaker, as an adult artist, has been my jam. Doing woodcuts and linoleums and silk screen. And over the last 10 years, I've picked up doing letterpress as part of my work, which is that sort of old school, old fashioned setting of wood and metal type. It's the kind of technology which is a stretch of the term, but the kind of technology that was used to print posters and newspapers. So my medium of choice has stayed the same. Certainly my work has evolved in that rather than just doing art that sort of depicts the world as I see it, over the last 15 years or so, my art has really focused more on art that holds message. So art that actually can spur debate, can spur curiosity, can be used in movements for change. So my art has become more activist in nature over the last 15 years, for sure. And so as a result, it means the image making that I do has also changed. But more recently, in the past 2 years, my art has become much more personal. I don't have a lot of this in the presentation I'm going to share with you today, but there is an image on the screen, and I've got one or two more that I'll share with you, where my art has really focused more on the research I've been doing into my own family's history and what that means. My work in the world is really focused in the realm of anti-racism. And so it's just very interesting to be an artist in the South who has discovered a family history that is filled with lots of complications and some really sort of dark knowledge. And so I've actually been using my art in the last couple of years to explore that family history and connect it to sort of the moment that we're all living in today. And that's been real different than making art that's more about the larger world around me. When you're making art about something that's highly personal, it is definitely a different journey.
Absolutely. One other question here. How do you, and I think you've answered this, but are there any reoccurring symbols or imagery in your work that has a special meaning for you? Because we've noticed in our work with other artists that you can see that.
Dry skin every day with these ceremonies. I need to see.
Right, somebody, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So there are definitely some symbols that are recurring. Text as a deliverer of message, text plays a really large part in my visual works of art. And so words of substance, words that mean something to me, words that sort of trigger people to be engaged with the work are one of the symbols for sure. There are figures, like historic figures, that appear over and over and over again in my work. People like Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, John Lewis appear pretty regularly in the work I've done over the last 15 years. And also just kind of everyday images, images that seem, sort of really basic and pedestrian, appear in my work. An example is something as simplistic as a grill, right? Something that we all grill on in our backyard has been a symbol in my work as sort of a way to express community. Targets seen in a weapon appear pretty regularly in my work, but also symbols of abundance. One of my favorite symbols to use in my work are pieces of fruit, and I tend to use a lot of like tangerines and pomegranates, and these are things that I grow in my own yard. So they're sort of symbols of this idea of birth and regeneration and beauty. But they are also cultural symbols, as we know. The pomegranate is a symbol that is used across history and across cultures and across faith communities. And so I'm really interested in these symbols that carry lots of different meanings, including symbols that often carry contradictory meanings. which sometimes leads to confusion around some of the messages. But, we live in a complex world. So, of course, a lot of the symbols that I sometimes use have that complexity embedded in them. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, this is one that I've wondered about a lot. How do you, as an artist, navigate the balance between artistic expression and commercial viability? Or do you worry about that?
So I am much more focused on the expressive side of it than commercial viability, to be honest with you, probably to a fault. I have never actually made art as my primary means of survival, right? So because of that, it means I haven't had to focus on its viability within the commercial space. Even though my undergraduate degree in studio art was as a graphic designer, and I spent, several years sort of working in that field, my work as an artist is really about focusing on the things that I feel I must say, the things that I wake up in the morning thinking about and caring about. My art is about the stories of other people that I come in contact with that I think need to be amplified. And if there's somebody out in the world that decides they like it too, and they want to collect it and buy it, that for me is a cherry on top. It's really not the motivation. In fact, I recently did a show of my work here at Yellow House, which was the first time I had done such in the 6.5 years that Yellow House has existed. And I originally wasn't even going to put prices on my work. I just wanted to show the work and let the work serve as a vehicle for conversation. I wasn't really interested in selling the work. And somebody who means a lot to me, who's much wiser than me, who is also my husband, Barry Wilson, he advised me otherwise. He said, you should price it because you might be surprised that people are going to want to stay connected to this work. And he was right. And the art sales I was able to make during the run of that show poured directly back into Yellow House and the mission of Yellow House. So when I can sell the work, great. But yeah, if I worried about commercial viability, I'd probably be doing very different work.
Mm-hmm. And that's a question that every time we have an artist, I like to explore that. The final one that I'm going to ask you, and I think you'll probably in your slide presentation, which you taught, but hopefully, I'm sure you'll touch on this one, was what do you hope that viewers take away from your art?
So, I'll tell you that in a way is a hard question for me to answer, because I actually no longer see my individual work as an artist as separate from my artistic practice at Yellow House. And it's sort of an interesting and somewhat complicated blurring of edges, right? Between being an educator, an activist, a curator, and an artist. And so for me, if my individual art is wedding well with those other parts of my social practice, then the balance is right. For me, what I hope that people take away from my art is an opening into a connection to other people, right? Other histories, other stories, other lived experiences, maybe a little bit of agitation at times, but more often than not, a sense of being connected to a larger human family. And so it's hard for me to speak about that specifically through my art as a visual artist, because it really, that piece of who I am is so closely connected anymore with the other actions that I try to take on a daily basis. And And so as a result, when people experience my art, they tend to be experiencing it often as part of a conversation or as part of um, uh, political action or civic engagement. And so it's a little hard for me to separate it out, but that's probably the best answer I can give.
Well, just to follow up on that, and then I'll quit. And this one I have to, have you encountered, after saying all of that, have you encountered any surprising reactions or interpretations that were surprising to you of your work from viewers?
Always. I'm surprised by it on the regular. When I had my show up at Yellow House, which meant the work was very public, and because it was at Yellow House, which is the space that I hold on a daily basis, it meant I was getting real-time feedback and conversation about my art every hour of every day that I was here, which is a gift. It also was intense. There was no hiding from how people were going to interpret the work. And there were some surprises in that. For some people, it really kind of broke their hearts open. There were people who sort of came in, I think, often with one set of expectations, and in experiencing the work and being in conversation, they really became very vulnerable and used the art as a way to share some of their own stories. I had one woman the last week that my exhibition was up who came up to me and she whispered. For some reason, she felt like she needed to whisper, even though we were the only ones in the building. And she said, I love your work, but I don't understand why you felt you had to say this out loud.
Oh my God.
Right. And so the surprise in that was just, I think, people who connected with the work, but that sometimes there's just enough discomfort in it being a conversation, that kind of a messy conversation, right? And when you put stuff on a wall, it means you're opening up for whatever that brings. And I feel like if it's not doing that, then my work isn't doing what I intended to do.
Well, and I think that's just a great segue into sharing
Yeah.
your with us. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will
Yeah.
stop
Thank
sharing,
you.
and let's hope this works. Let's hope technology works. I'll stop my share and you get your share going.
Great.
Okay.
Great. So a couple of words before I begin sharing these images. I really put together some images that really focus as much, if not more, on my work through Yellow House, which is both as an artist, an educator, a curator, and an activist. I have a little bit of my own work as an artist in there. But I just, again, I am one of these artists whose practice is really built on primarily the work of others. But I feel like I have an appreciation for what artists do because I am also an artist. So some of this stuff I'll kind of go through fairly quickly. And the visuals are really here because I wanted to give you some eye candy and let you see some things that, for those of you that are going to actually visit Yellow House in the coming weeks, the things I'm going to show you today are things you can't necessarily see because they are things that have already happened, right? And then I really hope that we'll have plenty of time to be able to actually have some conversation and some questions. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any of it. So I don't know how many of you have been to Yellow House, and I keep saying it's part of my practice because that is really, as an artist, Yellow House is my most important creation at this point. It is a physical place, but it's also an idea that really focuses on the role that art can play in building community, the role that art can play as an impetus for positive change. And so on the screen here, you just see a couple of glimpses of some of the kinds of things that happen at Yellow House. I love that I'm talking to y'all this week because it's exactly 7 years ago that I signed the lease for the building that I'm in, which to me is an important anniversary because it meant a commitment to doing this work. It was a moment in which I was leaping out of my role at the Cummer. As was mentioned, I was there for 23 amazing years, most of it in the education department, because that is really my background and where my heart is as an artist and an educator. So I ran the education department for a long time there, standing on the broad and powerful shoulders of people like Jean Haddad and Ann Saltmarsh-Lasher. And then I finished out my run there by being executive director. And I was always a very reluctant executive director. It was just not what I ever intended to do. I loved being an educator and an artist, and because of lots of different reasons, ended up being a director. And I'm grateful, very grateful for that experience, because it was really everything that I learned there that gave me really the courage to do something on my own. And that came from the fact that in my last year and a half at the Cummer, I started waking up every day thinking about what is the role of art and what is the role of a cultural organization in doing real grassroots community work. What does it mean to address some of society's biggest challenges through the art and through a cultural space? And I became a bit obsessed with it. And, that kind of obsession isn't necessarily great when you're also trying to lead a, $7 million organization that was both interested in doing the work, but that also couldn't be the only work that the organization was doing. So after I left the Cummer and spent a year scheming and dreaming and planning, that is when I created Yellow House. And so I also created it, though, for selfish reasons, y'all. I created it because I was at a point in my life where I needed to be able to be an artist, an educator, an activist, and a curator, all of it, without apology. I needed to be able to do that in a way where it became a single practice, where I was not splitting myself into 4 and 5 different people to be living the way that I wanted to live. And so on the screen here, you see little glimpses of kind of what that looks like to be an activist and an educator and have an art studio practice, which you see me in this one image standing in the little tiny print studio that I have set up here at Yellow House with some of my art and other people's art behind me. But that was really the impetus for the creation of Yellow House, was both to do the community work, but to also give me a space to be able to live the way that I really wanted to live. And me being an artist was really critical to this. These are just a very few samples of some of the art that I've done more recently, combining images and text and statements of purpose. The image on the bottom right of Harriet Tubman as a sticker on top of this is a manhole cover. If you can read that image, right? It's a manhole cover. And you all know that, Jacksonville is named after Andrew Jackson. And you may also remember there was a period of time several years ago where Andrew Jackson's face was going to be taken off of the $20 bill and replaced with Harriet Tubman's as sort of a little bit of repair in how we talk about American history. So at the time, I went around the city replacing Andrew Jackson's image with Harriet Tubman's image. I did this all over the city, and I did get a cease and desist order from the mayor's office at the time to stop doing this work. And so I did it for a little while longer, but decided to stay out of jail. And so I stopped doing that. But this is a sense of some of the kind of work that I've been doing. And so Yellow House was born about 6.5 years ago now. This is what it looks like. It's located on King Street in North Riverside. And it's really focused around giving space to artists to do, be, and say what they need to do, be, and say. We focus on local artists, We center Black, brown, young, and queer artists in the work that we do, primarily, not totally, but primarily. And we do this because there really are never enough venues for artists to show their work. I love that the Cathedral has a space, a gallery space, where you all show artists' work regularly. The landscape is changing in Jacksonville, which is a beautiful thing. But there's still never enough spaces for the amazing talent that we have in this city. And I do this work building on this foundational quote. So when you walk in the front door of Yellow House, this quote is on the wall by the great writer and thinker Toni Morrison. And it's been an important quote to me for a long time. But this idea that artists have a role to play in leading society forward, right? That even in the hardest times, and maybe especially in the hardest times, it is where artists are needed most. And I love how she says there's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, and no room for fear. Like, our artists tend to charge into conversations that are really tricky. Artists also help us see the future by giving us glimmers of a vision of what can be. And so at Yellow House, it looks a lot of different ways. You know, it's about representation, right? People being able to truly see themselves in the works of art that are on the walls. It's about community, right? So it's also a place where people come together and listen deeply to one another's stories and experiences. It's also about civic engagement, right? We want people to take in art that actually spurs action. You know, this particular exhibition was about encouraging people to actually go out and vote. And we're going to be doing another such exhibition this summer leading up to the November elections. But it's also about breaking bread. It's about the simple acts of sitting across a table from somebody you do not know and being in conversation over a simple meal. And for us, that happens inside the building. It also happens on our front lawn at our picnic tables. And then it is about also doing good trouble. And not everybody loves everything that we do. I don't always love everything that we do, but this place isn't just about me. But it is a place that sometimes scratches at scabs that are over wounds that aren't necessarily fully healed, right? It's a place where people can find one another around issues that matter. Here you see just a few of them. You know, we've gotten very involved in climate justice work. We were involved in changing the names of schools and Confederate monuments, but we also train peacekeepers. We are a hub for the peacekeeper group that helps keep any kind of public rallies and protests safe for the people who are there. So we serve lots of different roles for different people and different groups in that way. But we are also a place that's about teaching and learning. And so no matter what we do, it always has a strong education component. And that is a part of my practice. And I pour into young people at every turn that I possibly can. We are a hub for young people to take classes, but to also just be here, to figure out who they are using the performing arts as well as the visual arts, for them to lift up their voices, for other people to hear what they have to say, and to just simply hang out. This is the living room at Yellow House. We have a living room at the front of our building. And this is what we look like on Wednesdays. There's a group of young people from like 18 to 20 something who come and just hang out. They read books, they make art, they debate, and they give a lot to the community of Yellow House. We also do our work out in community, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this I also feel is part of my practice. My art often is born of the conversations that I'm having in places like Kennight Drive after they've been hit by storms and hurricanes. It's a community that we've spent almost 7 years in now, helping to rebuild houses, to make art with people, to listen to people, to eat pie with families. It's become a really sort of special part of our work. And even during the pandemic, we kept doing that work. And when there were needs in the community, like raising money to keep people's lights on, we used art and artists as a way to raise that money. So we are not just people putting up pictures, but we are trying to use it to actually support our neighbors. Part of our practice is also going to a farm. Once a week, I and my volunteers go to a farm in Hastings, Florida, and we trade our labor for food. And that food comes back to our community and is given out to our neighbors, because we are in a food desert here where Yellow House is located. And so food has become an important part of what we do. But we also take art to the farm. And so we have sort of energized their landscape through a series of murals and public art projects. And this is the community cart on the front lawn of Yellow House. This is where we give out free books, free produce, period products, Narcan, hygiene items. It's a place where people give and a place where people receive. And then we do lots of exhibitions. And I'm not going to spend time on this because I want to open up the conversation. But the exhibitions are quite varied here, and they include lots of voices that often are not always heard in our public institutions. They allow artists who have really important bodies of work that are captivating, beautiful, and sometimes provocative to be given space, right, for all of us to then be able to engage with. Whether it's Black women talking about what it means to be a Black woman and a Black artist, or it's immigrants from Syria and Iran and Afghanistan sharing their art and sharing their words, this is a really critical part of the work I do, is to simply hold a space where these things can happen, right? Young people coming in and curating their own exhibitions, putting art up by 16-year-olds as if it is as important as an old master painting. We believe really strongly that the community at large is hungry for these kinds of experiences, where we actually can find each other across generations, across race, across geographies. Yeah, this is something that we pour an awful lot into. And we're willing to take up hard topics, whether that's the history of lynching, whether it's the role of racism in our community, or it's about wellness and safety. We work with artists who are sharing these kinds of stories. And we have powerful partnerships that help it happen with people like 90 Forward. We have a powerful partnership with Mayo Clinic. These images are from our work with Mayo Clinic, which we do on a weekly basis. And then my own work, these are a couple just glimpses of the show that we just had of my work, where the history of the South merges with like the issues of this moment, right? You know, I am a descendant of enslavers and Confederates, and that's a history that I want to look at, that I want to actually spend time understanding. That's part of my truth, and it's something that has been really interesting to put out into the world. And so that is an important part of my practice, is to make this art, to make it public, and to be part of the conversation around it. And so whether we are pushing out books through our little libraries, or other artists are in my studio making art with me, like you see here on the screen, or I am gathering up fresh produce to give to our neighbors, all of this feeds my work. And some of that work happens in a studio, and some of it happens out in community. Some of it ends up on a wall in a gallery. Some of it ends up out on a wall out in the city at large. And for me, even though the work can be challenging and hard, it's also filled with a lot of joy. It's filled with a lot of love, and love that comes in lots of different forms, right? The love of people coming together, the love of people finding one another, and the love of just taking care of each other. And I just happen to believe that the arts play a huge role in that. And though I am not the only person associated with Yellow House, we have a small and mighty and beautiful team of people. When I talk about my work as an artist, it's more important for me to actually talk about the work of Yellow House, because to me, that is my work as an artist. And I'll leave you with this before I open it up for questions. This is another sort of foundational set of words for me, and I believe it. We have to create, because it is the only thing that seems to be louder, stronger, and more powerful than destruction. So with that, I would love to just open it up for conversation. And I appreciate all of you still being on the meeting and listening.
Oh, it's wonderful. Questions, gals, that you might have for Hope? Anything about the Yellow House or her artwork or background? Any questions?
I'll start off. What is, you talked about all of the different aspects and things you've explored. What do you see maybe ahead in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of, are you going in any new directions or just any new themes to look for? Just curious about that.
So, you know, the next 6 to 12 months, we're doing a lot. So there's two things that are sort of dominating the work of Yellow House's conversations for the coming year, and in my own work too. One is about civic engagement, right? It's about how are we all engaged in the process of building a democratic society, and I mean democratic with a little d. You know, what does it mean to be engaged in your community? What does it mean to vote or choose not to vote? What does it mean to be paying attention to the issues that affect our neighbors, right? So that's one piece. And so a lot of our exhibitions and my own work are going to be focused on that. But the other is really around community care. You know, the world is so complicated and the pace of life so intense. You know, mental health is something that needs regular attention, not just for ourselves, but for the greater whole. And so this idea of what does community care look like, feel like, and mean, right? And how do the arts and artists play a role in that, right? In creating conditions in which we can all be well and whole and see each other and be seen by one another. That's going to be a pretty big driver for us too. And the two are certainly linked, right? You know, there just feels like there is a lot of hurt and a lot of pain and a lot of trauma all around us and within us. And some of that trauma goes back generations, and some of it is being born today. And so we're really interested in how we hold space as an art space for that kind of work, for the work of care. So those are two pretty dominant themes.
Anybody else got a question for Hope? Well, I'm going to tell you.
Any question goes, y'all.
Yeah,
any
she doesn't care at all.
If people wanted to support you all or you know, be more part of what you're doing, what are some areas where you need the most support, either financially or you know, labor or you know, that kind of contribution?
Yeah, a little bit of all of it, right? We're pretty small, we're pretty scrappy. You know, we survive on you know, mostly a big collection of small contributions, and those contributions for us come in lots of different shapes and sizes. Yeah, there's the financial piece, but there's also the way people contribute labor, right? The community cart, the mutual aid work that we do, where we are both giving into the community and receiving from the community needs constant care and feeding, right? I mean, we push about 200 to 250 books out of Yellow House every month, because we are in a neighborhood where most of the people who are interested in books and looking for books are not really in walking distance to a library. And so when I talk about our community cart, it's really a space of sustenance. What is it that we all need to be whole? And that includes food, books, hygiene items, which is really about dignity and respect, right? And so we are always taking donations of books, of food items, hygiene items. Like, that is a huge piece of what we do. In fact, I mean, because our community cart is open all day, every day, right? So we feed it, but as important, it gets fed by the community. So I'll show up sometimes to work and the whole cart is full of stuff. I don't even know where it came from, because it doesn't matter. It's not just about us. It's about people leaving what they have and people taking what they need. And so that's a huge way for people, both on an individual level, but also as a group, to get involved in some of the work we do at Yellow House. And then we have volunteer days where we do everything from help 90 Forward build 20 little diverse libraries that get put up around town. Sometimes we're prepping art supplies for a really large community art project we might be doing with children and families. And so keeping up with sort of our calls for volunteers is also another way to stay engaged with what we do.
On the books, are you looking for only new, or do you take new and gently used?
All of it.
All of it.
We take new and we take used. We take adults and we take children. I'll tell you a funny little story. When we first started giving out books, we've always had books as part of our mission, but like, it's become a serious part of our mission the last, I would say, 2.5 years. And we really focused on art books, children's books with great art, history books, books that address issues of, like, race and the environment and gender and all those things. And about a year ago, somebody left me a little note on our community cart, and it said, I'm not going to get it exactly right. It said something like, if you ever just have regular books like novels, do you mind leaving them for us? Signed, your unhoused neighbor. And I had to take that very seriously, because I thought, I was so focused on, like, I'm going to push out the books that we think are important. And ultimately, some people just need a trashy novel. Some people just need a murder mystery to read, right? They just need a way to escape the mess of this world, right? Or find worlds that are even messier than ours. And so I say that to say, we take pretty much any kind of book. And we really have a neighborhood that deeply appreciates it. I mean, it really, our little library is used so heavily. It's really a beautiful thing.
Well, Hope, you have really.
We have one more question from
Oh, sorry. Beth, you got one?
I think we've got time. Hey, Hope, I'm Beth Kerwin. I was curious how you distribute the food that you receive and the produce that you pick, and is there a system for that, or how does that work?
There really isn't. So we literally, so each day when I come in, whatever produce and food items we have in our pantry, because when we go to the farm, we come back with a whole truck full. So, we put some out and then we sort some and store it and refrigerate it here at Yellow House. I put stuff out on the cart once or twice a day, and then other people sort of fill in around it. The stuff moves so fast off the cart, we don't have to worry about what that process looks like.
Okay.
We do not do things like meat, the items that really have to be refrigerated, dairy items, that kind of thing. We don't deal with all that, right? But I mean, we literally, like this morning, I filled up the cart mostly with fresh produce. I had some beans and rice and canned goods and some canned fruit and some canned soups. And, you know, in the time that I was out there, you know, 3 or 4 families came by, gathered up a bag of items. And, you know, I can guarantee you by the time I started this talk with you all, that cart was empty.
Yeah.
So we don't, you know, it's a very, it's a system that works kind of outside the system, right? It doesn't really, nobody's having to sign their name on anything. We're not tracking. We're not asking for people to tell us what they're taking or why they're taking it, right? Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Hope, a quick question. This is Janet. Do you also take art supplies?
We do. We absolutely do. We, as you can imagine, get a lot of requests for art supplies, even simple things like notebooks and journals, you know, just things for people to be able to write on and draw on. We push out a lot of art supplies. In fact, there was one image in my slide deck where my friend Deja was working in the print studio, and there was a little stack of little journals. We every week print up little journals here at Yellow House in our print studio that we give out on our community cart, because we find that a lot of our neighbors just want a place to be able to write things down, to use it as a diary. Sometimes it's to sketch. We have one neighbor who says, you know, he's an elder, he lives alone, and he says that's where he thinks and talks, is by writing in that journal. And so, yeah, we take all kinds of art supplies, and sometimes we give them out on the cart. We also keep a stash of art supplies inside, so that if families are in here using Yellow House and a child has discovered our little art making table and they have fallen in love with something, let's say a set of watercolors, we'll go to the back room and we'll put together a little bag of paper, watercolors, and a brush, and make sure that that child leaves with that, so that they can do it at home too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Hi, this is Dee. I have 2 things. One, is there a particular day or time that you want delivery of the hygiene items or the books or whatever?
So we are open to the public here on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We're often here doing other work, but so much of our work is out in the community, and you know, we're a very, very small team. So Wednesdays and Saturdays are when we are here to help receive items. So if people are bringing like a whole box of books, we usually ask for that to be done when we're here, so that we can bring it inside, put some outside, and store the rest until it needs to go out. Otherwise, a lot of people just drop stuff right off at the community cart. We don't even have to be here and be open. It's just if there's like a large amount of items, it's better to do it when we're here.
Good.
And that's
now,
Wednesdays and Saturdays.
This is just a personal story. I met you when I first moved to Jacksonville, and I was a volunteer at the Comer, and Betsy Towers was my instructor. And our only grandson was there, and that thing you had out that you scribbled or you wrote in colors and you could print out your paper. I have made note, he was 20 months old, and I've made note cards from that. Well, fast forward, he's now 10, and he does watercolors. And I said, I know he got that at the Comer. Yeah. So thank you. I just wanted to let you know that sometimes people like you that are so talented and so giving, it really does impact personal, individual people. And you don't know it. You'll never know it, but I do. So thank you. Well,
Dee, thank you for that. I live for stories like that. It's really beautiful. You know, I mean, we never, all of us as human beings never know when a seed is going to be planted that actually affirms something important and positive in another person. You know, whether that's through our words, through our actions, right, through some sort of inspirational moment. And so I just think we all have such capacity to be able to do that. And when it can come back to us in a story that it really did have an impact, that's a real motivator. So thank you for that, Dee. I appreciate it. Yeah, beautiful.
Well, our time's getting short, and we have to have a little, we'd have to have a little advertisement for the bookstore. So, Catherine, what's happening at the bookstore and what do
And
we
we
need?
also have Beth who can share stuff too. But first of all, before we forget, for those of you, if you have not already RSVP'd, please do so if you'd like to join us next Tuesday, the 28th, where we will go to the Yellow House and meet and visit with Hope in person. We're going to gather here at 10 o'clock at the bookstore, so you'll have a little time to shop. And then we will caravan over to the Yellow House and get there between 11:15. We'll then visit and tour with Hope. And then we're going to go to lunch afterwards at Don Eduardo, the new yummy Mexican restaurant, authentic, in Riverside. So RSVP if you'd like to join us. Beth, we have a lot of new things in the store,
We
don't
have
we?
a lot of great gifts for graduations and Father's Days and all the special occasions that occur this time of year. We've got lots of artwork from local artists and beyond. So come on in.
And
Welcome.
one other little thing for anyone who loves tea, we have some new tea in that Beth and I discovered, I guess, a couple of years ago when we were on our Art at Noon DC trip. It's Blues Teas, which is a Black-owned farm in the DC area. And they have a wonderful history of how they got the name Blue. It's for one of their ancestors who did some important work in racial justice. And the tea is wonderful. I've tried them all. And so come in and we'll let you try some and before you buy.
Thank you. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, oh, Hope, thank you for taking your time. This has just been an absolutely wonderful experience for all of us. I mean, we knew you were an artist. I mean, you know, those of us that know 22, 3, 4, 5 years of your work, but what an impact you're making other than just with your artwork is just really remarkable. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us and share all of this wonderful activities with us, and come back, okay?
Thank you. I would love to, and I do hope to see some of you all next week. We'll have a grand little mighty time at Yellow House.
We will have a great time.
That's
All
right.
right, ladies and gentlemen, we sure have enjoyed this art time with you. And two little things from Art at Noon. We will be picking Art at Noon up back in August, not in June. This is our last one. And we will be, those of you that are going to join us, we're putting our Philadelphia trip together, which will be in October. And we will be talking about the Philadelphia Museum of Art and also Andrew Weiss' wonderful work. So join us in August. Thank you again, Hope, and thanks everybody for joining. We sure love you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
She was great.
Okay.